Hello everyone, I am Dr. Anne Wilcox, the Research Manager at the Institute of Leadership Management, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, number 2 of 5 in this week's series on mental health, delivered in collaboration with Mental Health at Work. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some items so you know how to participate. You've joined using your computer speaker system by default, and if you prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and dial-in information will be displayed. And you can submit your text questions at any time during the presentation by typing them into the question pane of the control panel, and we'll address them in the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce today's guests. Alison Pay, who is Managing Director of Mental Health at Work, a community interest company that provides advice, training and consultancy to improve mental health in the workplace through education, skills development and cultural change, and Raksha Rathod, who has an extensive background in learning and development and HR, gained whilst working for many organisations, including Selfridges and Audible. Raksha brings this experience and perspective as Learning and Development Manager at Mental Health at Work, and is also part of the team that delivers and facilitates their training activities. Alison and Raksha, over to you.
Thank you. So just to start off, we are a community interest company. We deliver customised programmes for organisations which really focus on what the workplace needs to know to be able to empower that change. So our mission is about improving working lives, and we do that by helping organisations change attitudes and behaviours. So in this series, we'll give you a little bit of an insight into some of the work that we do and some of the key aspects. It has to be an insight in the time that we've got available, but we'll hope that in each of these sessions, you'll all be able to take away something that you find really useful and you can start putting into action within your particular workplaces. If you'd like, there is an opportunity to be able to view the session that we had yesterday, and there is a link provided for that. But of course, please get in touch and we'd be happy to talk through how we might work with your organisation. So I'd now like to hand over to Raksha, who'll take us through today's topic around mental health. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, and thanks for the introduction as well. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today and joining this webinar today, and thank you for everybody who's signed up and taken the time to join us today. As Alison mentioned, we hope you were able to join in the webinar yesterday. If not, it's worthwhile having a look at the recording on the site as well. I'm taking a guess that the majority of you are probably here as leaders or potentially aspiring leaders, or maybe you just have a genuine interest in supporting mental health in the workplace. And whatever that reason may be, we're glad you're here today. At Mental Health at Work, we truly value the role that leaders and managers play with mental health in the workplace, and there is so much you can consider on this topic and how much you can support as well. But as a snapshot today, as Alison mentioned, we'll touch upon a few key considerations which I'm hoping that you will find useful and valuable. So if you were able to join us yesterday, you would have heard Maggie Rose, my colleague, talking about the mental health continuum. At Mental Health at Work, we value the importance of reminding everyone that everyone has mental health and it's not static. And this is where the continuum comes into play. At one end, there's mental health, where we are at optimal, and on the other end, there is mental illness. But for you as leaders, it's important to notice the difference in between. I cannot go to sleep one night in optimal mental health and then wake up the next day with a mental illness. There is a journey in between. And we often move away from our mental health on this continuum, but there are opportunities for us to move back to optimal mental health with the right support and guidance and people around us. If we do tend to move past the mental health issue, it's where we potentially will need professional intervention from our medical professionals. And this is because I wouldn't be able to do what I should, could, or want to do. And I would like to share at this point, even if an individual is diagnosed with a mental illness, with the right support from the medical professionals, they can absolutely still thrive in the workplace. So naturally, in this current climate, there will probably be quite a lot of back and forth in terms of our mental health, especially between mental health and mental issue. And that speed may change as well. And for this webinar, I think it's important to focus on that first part between mental health and mental health issue, because that's where you as leaders can make a difference for your colleagues and your teams as well. So let's start with duty of care. I'll let you read this, what's on your screen, and digest that to start with. And in addition to duty of care, there is also the Equality Act. This is another legal framework to protect individuals against discrimination, which is particularly relevant to those who have been diagnosed with a mental illness. But whilst we have both the moral and the legal obligation, we also have the obligation to be human in the workplace as well. And that's something we as leaders should really be aware of. And it's important that this obligation isn't any less important with the different circumstances, whether you're working from home, whether you're working remotely, or whether you're working in the office, because it's still important irrespective of the dynamics changing. And you may be wondering, how does that duty of care come into play? How do leaders fulfill it, whether it is working in the office or working remotely? And really, the starting point is about noticing, and then once you notice, acting on what you notice effectively. So moving on to everybody's duty of care and the responsibility of noticing and acting. It's absolutely important to know that that is just it. It is everybody's responsibility to notice and act. So you're not responsible on your own as a sole leader. And some consideration that you may have as a manager could come into play when you are taking it on this responsibility. And that could be from looking at deadlines, the risk to the business, what projects are you're working on the client needs, but that still doesn't stop you from acting, because you do have other people in the organization, you have leaders, you have HR departments that you can lean on, and also you have policies and procedures, and as well as the law as guardrails to support you in that responsibility. So bringing you back to what you can do personally, I think there is quite a few things that you could do in supporting you to notice and act. And I would love to go into detail about all of that. However, for the interest of time, I will focus on some key takeaways for you, which I think will be equally as valuable as well. And these are really around knowing your people, listening to your people, and also having quality conversations without assumptions as well. So looking back at those 3 points, I think it's important to talk about the principled approach. At Mental Health at Work, we look at the conversation with the principled approach in mind. And it's absolutely not about having a set of questions or a script to run through, but we believe the art is in how you have your conversation. And we trust in with having valuable and honest conversations as well. And if you have a set of questions or a toolbox that you refer to every time you're having a conversation about mental health in the workplace, it's going to be far from genuine. So that's why it's also important to focus on the how. And in order to be genuine, you simply cannot read from a script to have that conversation. Therefore, facilitating trust and being genuine is probably the leading principle here. And as you can see, that's the tip of the iceberg. But below that, there are a number of different principles that you would need to consider as well. Of course, there is going to be skills attached to each of these principles. However, this is absolutely the starting point here for you as leaders. So let's start with a simple question. If you look at the question, how are you? Sadly, how are you is often hijacked as just a basic greeting, or more than often. And I would really encourage you to think about, when was the last time you asked somebody, how are you? And when did you truly listen to that answer? And taking it even further than that, when did you carry on that conversation with that individual to really understand how they are? It's also easy to make assumptions based on your own circumstances, and you may end up advising someone based on your own experiences. But unfortunately, the reality is, majority of that time, that doesn't help that individual. I think in the current climate as well, we often hear the phrase, we're all in the same boat. But the reality is, are we actually? I think the reality is that we're all in the same storm, but we're absolutely in different boats. And as a result, those experiences and those situations can affect mental health in different ways as well. So we know it's harder to notice and act when you're working in different locations. It's absolutely not the same when you're seeing people on a day-to-day basis and in person, because you're not having as many opportunities to notice. However, you can still have regular conversations, and you can also notice things. For example, I may start off on video calls, really participating in the conversation, having my video on all the time. But you may notice that over time, my video is on blank and I'm not showing my face. I'm starting to mute my conversations more frequently. You may notice that my language on emails might be slightly different. And you may notice that I'm not taking part in work WhatsApp conversations as often as well. And when you notice these changes, that's when you can check in more regularly and you can have further conversation and really listen to what's going on and what's changing for me. So effectively, these principles and this principle approach will